that federal agents raided Golden Apple Buffet here in St. Peter's off Mexico Road Tuesday.
Federal agents ripped up the kitchen floor of a Chinese buffet in Missouri and uncovered fentanyl hidden inside soy sauce boxes. That shock was only the beginning. Following the money exposed Chinese intelligence links, underground banks shifting hundreds of millions each month, and a hidden DMV churning out flawless fake IDs.
Where are you from?
India.
India.
China.
China.
Yeah.
China.
Viral raid exposes nationwide criminal network. When agents pried up the floorboards, the case stopped being routine and turned into something far heavier. Beneath restaurant tiles at several locations hit the same week, Immigration and Customs Enforcement teams uncovered narcotics sealed to look like normal food freight, with soy sauce cartons packed tight with fentanyl bricks, a synthetic opioid so potent it has been tied to more than 70,000 overdose deaths in the USA each year, according to federal mortality data. After the South Fulton raid, 7 people were charged with drug offenses, and officials publicly warned that certain Chinese restaurants were being used as cartel stash houses built to blend into daily life. That discovery lined up with images already burning across social media. Days earlier, a video from a California Chinatown showed a Chinese man pressed against a wall by 2 women in plain clothes while masked men rushed in, his voice breaking as he shouted for help, with no visible badges, no uniforms, and no clear explanation before he was forced into a waiting vehicle. The clip spread within hours, pulling millions of views and triggering panic across immigrant neighborhoods that sensed something coordinated was unfolding. Another video followed and quickly eclipsed the first. In it, an agent questioned restaurant workers in public view, asking where they were from as cameras rolled. One voice answered India twice, another answered China again and again. The exchange awkward, tense, and clipped, yet replayed endlessly online. By nightfall, dozens of workers in that same Chinatown were zip-tied, loaded into unmarked white vans, and transported to federal detention centers as bystanders filmed and shouted. Reporters on the ground began connecting dots that official statements avoided. These were not random checks or local sweeps, but synchronized actions tied to Operation Silent Dragon, a national enforcement campaign planned for months. Internal briefings later confirmed that in the first 6 months of 2025, 103 Chinese nationals had been arrested, followed by a sudden surge where detentions jumped tenfold over the same period the previous year, a spike large enough to set off alarms inside civil rights groups and immigration courts. The Drug Enforcement Administration added another layer when it confirmed long-suspected links between Chinese and Mexican criminal networks. Precursor chemicals sourced from China were being processed into fentanyl, moved through Mexico, and distributed inside the USA through businesses that already handled heavy shipments, cash payments, and late hours. Commercial kitchens offered ideal logistics, from constant deliveries and cold storage to accounting systems capable of masking money laundering through shell companies and falsified invoices. Yet the investigation shifted again when analysts traced payment flows and encrypted communications tied to the restaurant stashes. Instead of stopping at street-level distributors, the trails pointed toward underground banking systems moving hundreds of millions each month and contacts associated with Chinese intelligence operations. The picture changed from immigration violations and drug trafficking to a counterintelligence concern involving foreign networks embedding operational infrastructure inside American cities, using restaurants and nightlife venues as quiet fronts. Adding to the tension, court filings revealed that many detained workers held valid government-issued work permits or had active asylum claims pending in immigration court, details left out of early press releases. Defense attorneys argued that enforcement actions had swept up legally authorized workers alongside suspects tied to narcotics, while federal officials insisted the scale of the threat required speed and secrecy. If agencies had monitored these networks for years, seized tens of thousands of fake identification cards, mapped money routes, and watched restaurants operate in plain sight, what finally pushed the switch in 2025 And why did a Missouri buffet become the place where everything was set in motion? Dawn breaks with battering rams. September 2, 2025 began like any other weekday near Interstate 70 by the Cave Springs exit, where Golden Apple Buffet sat busy and familiar, a Chinese restaurant known for packed tables and non-stop traffic. By mid-morning, the scene flipped when federal vehicles sealed off the parking lot. Armed agents spread out with radios and rifles, and the front doors were taped shut with official notices that stopped customers in their tracks. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Homeland Security investigations led the operation, backed by Federal Bureau of Investigation agents and local police, all moving in sync across 3 locations tied to the business. The restaurant was the only target. Agents also hit at least 2 nearby homes in St. Charles County where workers were known to live, arriving with battering rams, tactical helmets, and long guns as neighbors watched from driveways and windows. Doors were forced open without warning, commands shouted in English, and people were pulled outside in handcuffs and rushed into waiting vans. One resident counted close to 20 detainees from a single house, people they had seen for weeks riding together to and from the buffet in shared vehicles. Inside those homes, the chaos was sudden and frightening. Immigration attorney Jim Hacking later relayed what his clients described, explaining that 2 workers were stepping out of the shower when agents broke in, weapons aimed directly at them, voices loud and urgent, giving orders they barely understood. One worker's 5-year-old daughter asked on a video call why Daddy was wearing orange pajamas. He had no answer that made sense. He'd done everything right, and somehow that meant nothing. Others were asleep, some half-dressed, all stunned as armed officers demanded compliance, searched rooms, seized phones, and documented everything with body cameras. Back at the restaurant, regular customer Antonio Bishop pulled in expecting lunch, and instead found news crews and flashing lights. Seeing reporters first, he knew something serious had happened. When told it was an immigration raid, his reaction echoed what many assumed, asking if the people inside were illegal.
It was raided.
Raided for what?
By federal agents.
So it was the illegals in there, huh?
Maybe.
A word that spread fast across social media before any details surfaced. By noon, signs reading "closed until further notice" hung on the doors. The owners, Guo Liang Ye and Dejin Ye, both 56-year-old residents of St. Charles County, were already in federal custody. More than a dozen workers were transferred to detention facilities, separated from families, phones confiscated, names logged, and files opened as officers processed them one by one. As hours passed, prosecutors prepared charges that pointed far beyond a routine workplace sweep. Investigators outlined document fraud sophisticated enough to pass federal verification systems, including employment authorization cards and driver licenses that cleared database checks used by employers. Financial records tied the business to money laundering networks using layered transactions, cash deposits structured to avoid reporting thresholds, and shell accounts designed to hide large transfers. The most unsettling turn came when analysts flagged communication patterns and payment routes that overlapped with foreign intelligence monitoring already underway. Federal sources described links between the operation and overseas networks previously flagged in counterintelligence briefings, turning a local buffet raid into a matter discussed inside national security circles. What looked like a simple enforcement action now carried implications involving covert financing, identity manufacturing, and operational cover hidden inside ordinary businesses. As lawyers gained access to detainees, another layer emerged that prosecutors had not highlighted. Several workers held valid government-issued work permits, while others had pending asylum cases already logged in immigration court. Their paperwork had been approved or was actively under review, raising questions about how they were swept up alongside alleged fraud and money laundering suspects. If agents believed the threat justified armed raids, door breaches, and mass detentions, and if legal workers were caught in the same dragnet as alleged criminal operators, What exactly was uncovered inside Golden Apple Buffet that morning that pushed federal authorities to move this hard, this fast, and this publicly? Criminal infrastructure hiding in plain sight. When agents searched the homes and storage spaces tied to Golden Apple Buffet, they realized they were not dealing with simple fake papers, but a full-scale document factory that one attorney described as a shadow department of motor vehicles. Inside were stacks of driver's licenses, social security cards, and work permits produced at an industrial level, using printers, cardstock, inks, and embossing tools that matched government standards closely enough to pass checks at state offices and major banks. These were not sloppy copies made with scissors and glue, but clean, sharp cards with correct fonts, barcodes, hologram layers, and seals that mirrored real government issues. Some of the documents cleared the E-Verify system, the federal database employers rely on to confirm work eligibility. One fake Social Security number was used by 17 different workers in 6 states simultaneously. The system never flagged it. Banks opened accounts with it. Credit cards were approved. For 3 years, that single number existed in 17 places at once, and nobody noticed until agents cross-referenced arrest records. Workers showed their papers, employers entered the details, and the system returned a green light. From the outside, everything looked legal. Payroll ran as normal, taxes were filed, and no red flags appeared. Investigators later confirmed that the forgery operation had studied verification rules, timing gaps, and database delays, exploiting weaknesses that allowed fake identities to live inside real systems without raising alarms. Missouri was only one node. Years earlier, federal agents had intercepted a shipment containing roughly 20,000 fake driver's licenses shipped from Hong Kong and mainland China. The cards were packaged and labeled like consumer goods, moved through international freight channels, and seized in one haul. Despite the size of that seizure, internal sources later admitted it did not trigger a full national crackdown. One Federal Bureau of Investigation source acknowledged that neither informant tips nor the massive license seizure pushed leadership to act aggressively at the time, allowing the network to keep running. As raids spread through 2025, patterns repeated across cities. Chinese-owned restaurants, karaoke lounges, massage parlors, and unlicensed nightclubs appeared linked through the same underground services, sharing smugglers, document suppliers, and money handlers. These businesses served as job placements for newly arrived workers and as cash engines that could absorb large amounts of untraceable income without drawing attention. In Los Angeles, Immigration and Customs enforcement teams raided nightlife venues tied to these networks and arrested 36 Chinese and Taiwanese nationals for immigration violations. Videos showed people handcuffed and led into vans, but officials said these were targeted actions, not random sweeps. According to case files, the club sat on trafficking routes that ran north through Mexico, functioning as both employment hubs and operational covers for broader criminal activity. Housing followed the same script seen in Missouri. Workers lived together in properties owned by limited liability companies, transported in vans between job sites, their schedules and movements tightly controlled. Neighbors noticed packed driveways with vehicles carrying plates from New York, Georgia, Ohio, Virginia, and Texas, suggesting coordination across state lines. These were not local setups, but pieces of a national system that moved people and money quietly. Then investigators mapped the cash. Underground banking networks handled transfers without banks, wires, or records. Cash deposited in Missouri would trigger a matching payout in China, minus a 3% fee, settled through trusted brokers using code words and handwritten ledgers. Hundreds of millions moved this way each month. No paper trail, no alerts, just balance sheets kept in private notebooks. A single buffet in Missouri could be washing money tied to Los Angeles clubs, New York construction crews, or border smuggling routes, all while serving lunch and dinner to families who never noticed anything unusual. The business looked ordinary, the workers kept their heads down, and the system stayed hidden in plain sight. The plot twist. When immigration attorney Jim Hacking finally sat down with the workers detained after the Golden Apple Buffet raid, he walked in expecting a familiar pattern of undocumented workers facing removal. What he found instead cut straight through the public story federal agencies had been telling. Many of the people pulled from their homes at gunpoint had followed the immigration rules step by step, filled out the forms, paid the fees, passed interviews, and waited their turn, only to end up handcuffed and locked up anyway. The Indonesian workers represented did not sneak across borders or overstay short-term visits. They applied for visas through United States consulates, attended required interviews, and received official approval to enter the country. After arriving, they filed asylum applications, a legal request for protection allowed under federal law. Once those applications were on file, they applied for work authorization, which asylum applicants are permitted to do while their cases remain under review. Those permits were issued by the same government that later sent armed agents through their doors. One case made the contradiction impossible to ignore. A 23-year-old man from Indonesia received his visa in August 2023 after completing the full process. In April 2024, he filed his asylum claim. Soon after, the federal government granted him a work authorization card valid through 2030. That card allowed him to work legally, earn income, and live openly. In August 2025, he saw a job post on Facebook advertising work at Golden Apple Buffet, including wages, tips, and housing. He moved into a company-owned house days before agents arrived with battering rams. Hacking confirmed that 8 of his clients had valid work authorization cards in their wallets when they were detained. All had entered through official channels or filed asylum claims correctly. They believed they were doing exactly what the system told them to do. They applied for jobs openly, filled out employment forms, and showed their documents to their employer, who accepted them after standard verification. Their housing situation also told a different story than early rumors suggested. Workers said they responded to online job listings, relocated to the St. Louis area, and moved into shared housing connected to the job. They described having their own rooms and beds, basic living conditions, but nothing resembling confinement or control. Hacking initially suspected human trafficking and pressed his clients with detailed questions about threats, withheld documents, and movement restrictions. After speaking with everyone involved, he found no evidence of coercion or forced labor. Reports claiming that 20 people packed into a single house did not hold up under scrutiny. According to the workers, they were spread across 4 properties. Each person described a private sleeping space and the freedom to leave. The arrangement looked like employer-provided housing common in restaurant and hospitality work, not a trafficking setup. None of those distinctions mattered when federal agents moved in. Workers with government-issued authorization were dragged from showers, placed in handcuffs, and held in county jails for weeks. Some were pushed to sign papers agreeing to voluntary departure, even though they had open cases and legal permission to work. Hacking summed up the irony plainly. People often ask why immigrants do not follow the rules, yet his clients did exactly that and still ended up treated like criminals. If the federal government issued these permits, approved these cases, and verified these documents, how could the same system justify locking these workers away without charges? And what legal tool allowed it to happen at all? Orange jumpsuits without charges. One morning in October 2025, about 9 workers were led into a federal courtroom and told to sit inside the jury box, not as jurors but as detainees whose fate would be decided behind closed doors. The hearing was sealed without warning. Reporters were ordered out, doors locked, and the public cut off from everything that followed. What later leaked through urgent calls from attorneys inside exposed the legal move holding these workers in jail with no charges and no trial date, using a rarely discussed power known as material witness detention. Under federal law, a material witness can be jailed if prosecutors claim that person is necessary for testimony in a criminal case and might become unavailable later. In the Golden Apple Buffet case, that label was applied to workers who had not been accused of any crime. Prosecutors argued that if these workers were deported, they could not testify against the restaurant owners, so they had to stay locked up in the USA to protect the case. Freedom was traded for convenience, and legal status did not matter. Attorney Mick Henderson said nothing like this had been used in this jurisdiction before. Defense lawyers for the restaurant owners wanted the workers kept available to testify in ways that might help their clients, while prosecutors wanted the same workers held so their own case would not fall apart. In the middle sat people who only wanted to go home or move on with their lives, now trapped by a system where both sides agreed they were necessary, but neither side would release them. One of Henderson's clients was an Indonesian woman in her late 20s or early 30s who had already been scheduled for removal the same day as the sealed hearing. Her plane ticket was ready. Her mother was waiting in Indonesia. Then the hearing happened, and everything stopped. Because lawyers might need her words later, she stayed in jail. Henderson explained that every extra day meant another night behind bars while her family waited on the other side of the world. Emails from federal prosecutor Diana Edwards revealed the government's own framing. She referred to the detainees as witnesses and victims, not defendants, stating they faced no criminal exposure and did not need to protect themselves under the Fifth Amendment. That wording made one thing clear. The government did not see them as criminals, yet still kept them in custody. Some were held in the St. Genevieve jail, hours away from St. Louis, where attorney visits became rare and phone calls were limited. Isolation settled in fast. The sealed hearing dragged on for nearly 4 hours as lawyers argued over timelines, depositions, and how long detention could legally continue. In the end, the judge ordered the workers held at least through Friday, so sworn depositions could be taken and preserved in case they were later deported. Weeks after the raid, 9 workers made a choice shaped by exhaustion, not justice. They signed for voluntary departure, agreeing to leave the USA immediately just to escape indefinite detention. 5 were already gone by mid-October. Others waited, unsure if they would be released or kept longer for testimony. If the government called these workers witnesses and victims, held them without charges, and admitted they were not criminals, why were they the ones in jail cells while the business owners accused of fraud walked free on bond and reopened within weeks? Simple harboring turns to conspiracy, document fraud, and asset forfeiture. On September 4, 2025, just 2 days after the raid, a federal grand jury handed down indictments against Guo Liang-ye and De Jin-ye. The first charge sounded narrow and clean on paper. 1 felony count each of bringing in and harboring aliens, a federal crime that covers knowingly hiding or shielding people from detection when they are in the United States without legal status. The statute carries heavy weight, with penalties listed as up to 10 years in federal prison and fines that can reach $250,000 per person. Both men had already been arrested during the September 2nd operation and booked into the St. Charles County Jail. Then the gap in treatment appeared almost immediately. Within days, both owners were released on recognizance bonds, meaning no cash bail, no ankle monitors, just a signed promise to return for court dates. While they walked out of custody, the workers they were accused of harboring stayed locked in detention centers, waiting without charges. The contrast grew sharper when Golden Apple Buffet reopened. About 3 weeks after federal agents sealed the doors, customers were back in line, trays in hand, while the same owners facing felony charges returned to running daily operations. The restaurant never shut down permanently. It simply reset and continued. At first, the case looked like a straight immigration violation. That story did not last. On November 10, 2025, prosecutors filed a superseding indictment that changed everything. 2 new defendants were added: Feng Ye, widely reported as a relative of the owners, and Maria Cruz Cortez, identified as a key organizer behind the paperwork that made the hiring possible. With that filing, the case shifted from harboring to full conspiracy. The new indictment laid out a much bigger picture. Prosecutors now alleged a coordinated scheme involving 37 undocumented workers employed at Golden Apple Buffet between May 3rd and September 2nd, 2025. The central accusation was conspiracy to employ undocumented workers, stating all 4 defendants worked together to recruit, transport, house, and equip workers with fraudulent documents so they could pass employment checks. This was no longer about a few missed details in hiring. Federal filings described a system built to defeat E-Verify, the electronic database employers use to confirm work authorization. According to prosecutors, Feng Ye and Maria Cruz Cortez sourced and distributed fake Social Security cards and 9 employment forms designed to clear government verification systems. The documents were tailored, not generic, built to survive database checks long enough to keep payroll running. Individual counts spelt out roles. Guo Liangye and Feng Ye were charged with conspiracy to commit identification document fraud and multiple counts of hiring undocumented workers tied to named individuals from Mexico and Guatemala. Feng Ye and Maria Cruz Cortez faced charges for unlawful transfer of false identification documents, a charge reserved for people who distribute fake credentials, not just use them. The indictment also targeted money and property. Prosecutors moved to seize more than $100,000 in cash and 2 houses in St. Peter's linked to the defendants, signaling they viewed the operation as profit-driven and structured. Defending borders or destroying communities in the name of security? The espionage cases started landing, and the buffet raids no longer looked like simple immigration enforcement. Federal investigators quietly briefed lawmakers that some of the same underground banking networks funding restaurant fraud were also moving money for intelligence operations. The buffets weren't just fronts, they were infrastructure. Federal indictments began piling up across the country, each one pointing to technology theft, controlled exports, and intelligence activity tied to China. Suddenly, restaurants and nightclubs were being discussed in the same breath as satellites, microchips, and covert operations. In Virginia, a federal grand jury charged 2 Chinese nationals with trying to smuggle radiation-hardened microcrystals, highly specialized components used in satellites and military hardware built to survive space radiation and electronic warfare. These parts are not consumer electronics. They sit on the United States export control list because sending them overseas without licenses can directly weaken national defense systems. Prosecutors said the components were hidden and mislabeled to avoid detection. In August 2025, another case raised the stakes. Federal authorities arrested 2 Chinese nationals, one described as being in the country illegally, for exporting tens of millions of dollars in advanced artificial intelligence microchips to China. These chips power machine learning systems used in defense research, surveillance, and strategic computing. The USA has spent years restricting their sale because losing control over it means losing a technological edge. Investigators said the exports bypassed licensing rules meant to block that exact outcome. That same month, agents arrested Chinese national Yunhai Li on charges tied to stealing United States medical research data and tampering with government records. According to court filings, the stolen data involved biomedical research with clear value in genomics and pharmaceutical development, areas where years of research can be converted into a strategic advantage. Federal officials said this was not academic curiosity but intelligence gathering. By 2024, United States intelligence agencies had already warned that Chinese secret police stations were operating inside American cities. Often disguised as overseas service centers, these locations were accused of monitoring Chinese communities, pressuring dissidents, and quietly supporting state objectives without diplomatic approval. The idea that foreign operations were embedded inside ordinary neighborhoods was no longer theoretical. Investigators began connecting patterns. Chinese-owned businesses were appearing again and again as logistical hubs, places that moved cash, housed workers, and maintained communication channels back to China. When agents followed money and data trails from Golden Apple Buffet, they did not stop at payroll accounts. They found overseas links that suggested more than routine business activity. The fallout spread fast. In Los Angeles, Chinese restaurants and markets reported revenue drops of nearly half as customers stayed away from areas tied to raids. Importers faced longer inspections. Supply chains slowed. Legitimate businesses felt the pressure simply because of ownership and location. By late summer 2025, Immigration and Customs Enforcement shifted to mass removals. In Dallas, agents loaded 122 detainees labeled high risk onto a charter flight bound for Beijing. Photos showed restrained detainees guarded by armed officers, images released deliberately. Authorities said the group included people convicted of murder, drug trafficking, rape, bribery, and human smuggling, framing the operation as public safety. Beijing reacted with fury, accusing the USA of racial targeting and collective punishment. State media highlighted cases of detainees claiming legal status or pending claims. United States prosecutors responded by pointing to money laundering indictments, including a Massachusetts case accusing 7 Chinese nationals of moving more than 90 million yuan each year through underground banking tied to cash businesses like restaurants. 3 months after the Golden Apple Buffet raid, the owners were free on bond. The restaurant was open. 9 Indonesian workers were gone after choosing voluntary departure. Others remained detained, and fear rippled through immigrant neighborhoods. Advocates reported families planning for sudden arrests, avoiding hospitals, memorizing lawyer numbers. Federal agencies said they were dismantling criminal and intelligence networks. Critics said workers with valid documents were crushed in the process. If espionage threats were real and sophisticated, storming buffets and detaining legally authorized workers didn't seem like the way to go and actually stop them. If you enjoyed it, make sure to click on the cards on the screen now.